Brother lost his job and was living off my money for 6 months, then I stopped funding, and now his new wife says I lose her and I can't afford to give them money. That funny. When my brother Mark got fired, I wasn't surprised. He's always had a knack for testing people's patience, and from what I heard, his boss had finally had enough. Late arrivals, missed deadlines, endless excuses. It was only a matter of time. Mark called me that night, practically begging for help. "It's only temporary," he said. "I just need a little time to get back on my feet." It's hard to say no to family, so I agreed. I paid his rent for the month, helped him pay some bills, and even threw in a little extra for groceries. Frankly, I didn't think much of it at the time. But then came the second month. Mark still hadn't found a job, which he said was because nobody's hiring right now. He insisted that he looked every day, but I wasn't so sure. I mean, how hard is it to get a job? Even fast food places are hiring all the time. Still, I didn't push him too hard. He was my brother, and I figured he just needed a little more time to figure things out. By the third month, I began to see red flags. His new wife, Betty, was strangely defensive whenever I brought up Mark's job search. She'd say things like, "He's under so much pressure right now, Jacob. Just let him breathe," or "You have no idea how hard it is to stay motivated after a blow like that." The kicker? Betty wasn't working either. She'd quit her retail job months earlier because, as she put it, it was a toxic environment. That's when I realized they weren't just struggling, they were coasting. At my expense. When I suggested that Mark might want to broaden his job search, Betty snapped back. "He doesn't need you to criticize him. What he needs is support. We're doing our best." Really? Their best? Because it didn't look like it from where I was standing. By the fourth month, they were treating me like an ATM. Groceries, rent, car repairs. Every week there was a new emergency. And whenever I questioned it, Betty would jump in with another excuse, always in that passive-aggressive tone that made it sound like I was the one being unreasonable. I should have shut her down right then and there, but for some reason I didn't. Maybe I felt guilty. Maybe I just didn't want to deal with the drama. Either way, I kept paying, hoping things would eventually change. Spoiler, they didn't. What really got to me, though, was the entitlement. It wasn't just that they kept asking for money, it was the way they acted like they owed it. Like it was my responsibility to fund their lives while they sat around, finding themselves. By the 6th month, I was done. I was tired of watching them treat my hard-earned money like their personal safety net. But what finally pushed me over the edge? Betty's reaction when I told them I wasn't going to finance their lifestyle anymore. Let's just say it was incredible. By the time I showed up at their apartment to have the talk, I'd already rehearsed what I was going to say 100 times. I knew it wasn't going to go well, but I figured Mark would at least understand where I was coming from. He had to, right? I sat them down in their cramped living room. Well, Betty sat. Mark sort of hovered near the door, ready to bolt, and laid it out for them. "I can't keep doing this," I said. "It's been 6 months, Mark. 6. You're my brother, and I love you, but this isn't sustainable. You need to get a job, and I'm done covering for you." Mark didn't say a word. He just stared at the floor like he wasn't even there. Betty didn't miss a beat. "So you're just going to leave us? Right now? When we're struggling the most?" I should have seen this coming, but it still threw me. "I'm not abandoning you," I said. "I've been helping you for half a year. More than I should have, really. But it's time for you to take some responsibility." Betty crossed her arms and scoffed. "That's easy for you to say. You've got a steady job, no kids to worry about, no real stress. You have no idea what we go through. No offense, but you don't have kids either." I shot back. "And you're not exactly looking for work yourself." That hit a nerve. Her face turned red, and she launched into a tirade about how hard it was to find meaningful work in this economy, how she wasn't going to waste her life in a dead-end job like some mindless drone. I just sat there waiting for her to finish while Mark kept his mouth shut. When she finally stopped, I turned to him. Mark, seriously, what's going on? Why haven't you found anything yet? You're a smart guy. You've got experience. What's the problem? He shrugged. A shrug. As if I'd asked him why he didn't write me back or something. I'm trying, he mumbled. It's just hard right now. Tough? Mark, you're not even trying. You're making excuses while I'm paying your rent. That's not tough, it's lazy. Betty jumped in again. You're so judgmental, Jacob. Do you even hear yourself? We don't need this negativity right now. What we need is support. If you were a real man, you'd understand that. That's when I lost it. A real man? Are you kidding me? A real man doesn't sit around while his brother pays his bills. A real man gets off his ass and takes care of his own life. And honestly, Betty, you don't get to lecture me about being a man when you're not even willing to contribute to your own household. She gasped as if I'd just slapped her, and for a second I thought she was going to cry. But instead she doubled down. You're just angry because you can't afford to help us anymore. That's what this is really about, isn't it? You're not as successful as you like to pretend. I laughed. Really laughed. Betty, if I couldn't afford it, I wouldn't have lasted 6 months. This isn't about money, it's about limits. And frankly, you both need to grow up. I'm done. You can find a cheaper place, get jobs, do whatever you need to do. But I'm out. That's when the begging began. Betty tried to play the victim, tears streaming down her face, begging me to reconsider. Mark still said nothing. He just stood there and let her do all the talking. Are you crazy? I said, cutting her off. I'm not changing my mind. You have 2 capable adults in this apartment, and it's time you started acting like it. I walked out before she could say anything else, but I could hear her sobbing as I left. For a second, I felt bad. Really bad. But then I remembered that they'd done this to themselves. I thought that was the end of it. But of course it wasn't. The silence lasted for about 3 days. I thought maybe they'd finally gotten the message, that they'd take a hard look at their situation and start taking steps to get back on their feet. But no. Day 4 rolled around and I got the first text. It was from Betty, of course. You're heartless, Jacob. How can you sleep at night knowing we're struggling like this? I didn't reply. There wasn't anything I could say that would make her understand or keep her from twisting it into another guilt trip. Then came the phone calls. First it was Mark, sounding awkward and embarrassed, asking if I could just help them one last time. When I said no, he tried to lay it on thick. You know I'm looking for a job, Jake. It's just taking longer than I thought it would. Mark, it's been 6 months, I said. You're not looking hard enough. If you were, you'd have something by now. I'm not asking you to become a brain surgeon overnight. You need to step up. He sighed and hung up. 2 hours later, Betty called. She didn't even try to be polite. You're pathetic, you know that? Acting like you're some big shot provider when you can't even take care of your family. What kind of man are you? Betty, I said, trying not to lose my cool. I'm not your family. Mark is my family. And I have been taking care of him for 6 months. That's 6 months longer than I should have. If you two aren't willing to help yourselves, it's not my problem anymore. She started to shout, but I hung up before she could finish. I wasn't going to waste my energy arguing with someone who thought mooching was a valid life plan. For about a week after that, I kept getting texts. Long, ranting ones from Betty, guilty ones from Mark. I ignored them all. At first it was hard. I hated the idea that they were struggling, even if they'd brought it on themselves. But eventually I reminded myself that enabling them wasn't helping anyone. Then, out of nowhere, things got weird. One morning I went out to get my mail and found an envelope taped to my door. No address, no postage, just my name scrawled across the front in capital letters. Inside was a handwritten letter from Betty. It was unhinged. Full of accusations, insults, and weird little jabs at my life. She wrote that I was a failure in disguise, and that, no wonder you're still single, you don't know how to take care of anyone but yourself. She even threw in a few lines about how Mark was too good a brother to call me out. But that I was, obviously, jealous of him. Jealous of Mark. The guy who hadn't worked in half a year and was leeching off me to pay his rent. I should have just thrown the letter away, but I couldn't stop reading it. The audacity was overwhelming. She ended it with this gem. You will regret this. When we get back on top, don't expect us to throw you a bone. You'll need us before we need you. I sat there for a minute, just staring at the paper, wondering how anyone could be so delusional. But as ridiculous as the letter was, it also made me feel uneasy. The way she kept talking about how I'd regret cutting her off, it felt like a threat. I told myself I was overthinking it, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. And I was right. I just didn't expect it to come so soon or in this way. 3 days after Betty's letter, I thought things had finally quieted down. No calls, no texts, no drama. I was even starting to feel relieved, like maybe they had finally accepted the reality of the situation. Then, out of nowhere, I got a call from my mom. "Jacob, what's going on with you and Mark?" she asked, her voice tense. I sighed. "Mom, I already told you he's been living off me for 6 months. I had to cut him off. You have to figure things out for yourself." She was quiet for a moment, then dropped a bombshell. "Well, Betty came to see me today. She said you lied about everything." "Wait, what?" "She told me that you've been spreading rumors about her, calling her lazy, and that you were happy to help until you started having financial problems. Now you're just blaming them for your own problems. Jacob, is everything okay? Are you having financial problems?" I couldn't believe it. Betty had gone to my own mother and spun some ridiculous sob story about me being the problem. "No, Mom, I'm fine. Betty's lying. They've been mooching off me for half a year and I've had enough. That's the whole story." She sighed. "Well, she said they're going to lose their apartment. She asked me for help. That's when it hit me. They were trying to guilt my mom into picking up where I left off." "What did you say?" I asked, catching myself. I told her I'd think about it. "But Jacob, their family. Are you sure you can't help them a little longer?" "Mom, no. That is exactly what they do. If you give them money, they'll never stop asking. You're just enabling them." She hesitated, but I was able to convince her not to get involved. I hung up feeling frustrated and exhausted, but at least I'd nipped this in the bud. Or so I thought. 2 days later, Mark and Betty showed up at my door. Unannounced. I opened it to find Betty standing there with a suitcase in one hand and Mark looking embarrassed behind her. "What is this?" I asked, already dreading the answer. "We're moving in," Betty said matter-of-factly, pushing past me into the apartment. "Excuse me? Well, since you don't want to help us with money anymore, we thought you could help us in other ways," she said, setting the suitcase down in the middle of my living room. "Don't worry, it's only temporary." I stared at her, stunned. "You can't be serious." "Why not? You're the one who told us to find a cheaper place. What's cheaper than free?" I looked at Mark, waiting for him to say something, but he just shrugged his shoulders like this was all perfectly normal. "No," I said firmly. "Absolutely not. You are not staying here." Betty grinned. "Oh, come on, Jacob. Don't be so dramatic. You have plenty of room, and we're family. Or does that mean nothing to you anymore?" "That's not the point," I said, feeling my blood pressure rise. "The point is, you can't just show up uninvited and expect to move in." "Fine," she said, crossing her arms. "If you don't want us to stay, we'll sleep in the car." "Is that what you want? For your own brother to be homeless?" It was manipulative, infuriating, and so blatantly calculated that I couldn't even find the words. "Get your stuff and go," I finally said. Betty started to argue, but I cut her off. "Now, or I'll call the cops." That got her going. She grabbed the suitcase and stormed out, muttering under her breath about how heartless I was. Mark followed her without a word, and I slammed the door behind them. I thought that was the end of it. But the next morning I woke up to something I never expected. On the hood of my car, written in bright red lipstick, were the words, "You will regret this." seeing. You'll regret this. Smeared across the hood of my car was the kind of thing you'd expect to see in a bad movie, not in real life. For a moment, I just stood there, trying to process the audacity of it all. I took a picture, cleaned it up as best I could, and decided I was done playing nice. I wasn't even angry anymore, just exhausted. I called Mark. No pleasantries this time. Mark, I know you and Betty are behind this. If you don't stop, I'm going to the police. This isn't funny and it won't end well for you. Jacob, I swear we haven't done anything, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. You expect me to believe that? Who else would do something like that? He stammered for a second and then hung up. I figured that was the last I'd hear from him for the day, but I was wrong. A few hours later, while I was at work, my phone buzzed with a series of texts from an unknown number. Hey loser, heard you're big on threats these days. Be careful what you wish for. You might end up regretting it. We're everywhere. Keep looking over your shoulder. It wasn't signed, but I knew exactly who it was. Betty's style was unmistakable. I filed a police report that night. It felt a little extreme, but I wasn't taking any chances. Between the vandalism and the texts, she'd crossed the line from annoying to borderline threatening. The officer I spoke to said there wasn't much they could do without hard evidence, but they would keep the report on file. I thought that would scare them into stopping. Instead, it got worse. 2 nights later, I woke up around 2 a.m. to the sound of breaking glass. My heart stopped. I grabbed a flashlight and cautiously made my way into the living room. My front window was shattered, and in the middle of the broken glass was a rock with a note taped to it. The note read, "You really don't know when to stop, do you?" I immediately called the police. They came out, took another report, and told me they'd be increasing patrols in the area. I mentioned my suspicions about Mark and Betty, but without proof there wasn't much they could do. The next morning I called Mark one last time. "Mark, this is out of control. If you and Betty don't stop, I'm going to get a restraining order. And I mean it." He sounded really panicked. "Jacob, I don't know what's going on, but it's not us. I swear. Betty and we've been staying with one of her friends. We weren't anywhere near your place." At first I didn't believe him, but then something in his voice made me stop. He sounded scared, more scared than guilty. "What are you saying?" I asked. "I'm saying it's not us." "But, Jacob, I think Betty's ex might be involved." That came out of nowhere. "Her ex? What are you talking about?" "He's unstable," Mark said hesitantly. "She broke up with him right before we met, and he didn't take it well. He's been stalking us too. I didn't want to say anything because Betty didn't want to bring him up, but maybe he's trying to mess with you to get to her." I didn't know what to think. On the one hand, it sounded like something Mark and Betty would say to deflect blame. On the other hand, if it was true, things were a lot worse than I'd realized. "Why would he target me?" I asked. "I don't know," Mark admitted. "Maybe because you're her brother-in-law? Maybe he thinks you're the one who's helping us out, so he's trying to scare you." I didn't trust Mark, but his fear was real. And if he was telling the truth, then I was dealing with someone far more dangerous than a bitter sister-in-law. That's when I decided to install cameras around my property. If this guy or anyone else came near my house again, I wanted proof. I didn't have to wait long. 2 nights later, the cameras caught something chilling: a man in a hoodie sneaking up to my car with a can of spray paint. He painted a huge red X on my windshield, then turned to face the camera. He pulled his hood down just long enough for the camera to catch his face. It wasn't Mark. It wasn't anyone I recognized. But whoever he was, he smiled right into the lens before walking away. When I showed the footage to the police, they recognized the guy right away. His name was Kyle, and sure enough, he was Betty's ex. He had a record of stalking, harassment, and even a restraining order filed by someone else a few years back. Apparently, Kyle had been keeping tabs on Betty ever since she left him. When he found out about me, probably through her social media or gossip, he must have decided I'd be an easy target. The officer assured me they'd look into it, but Kyle was already on their radar for other incidents. Everything started to click. Betty's defensiveness, Mark's reluctance to talk, even some of the bizarre things they'd said, it all pointed to Kyle being the real problem. The strangest part? Betty never mentioned him. Not once. Maybe she was embarrassed or thought it would make her look bad, but her silence had made things so much worse. That was my breaking point. Between Mark's spinelessness and Betty's chaos, I couldn't take any more of their drama. I sent Mark one last message. Your life is your business, but I'm done. I've dealt with enough fallout from your mess, and I'm not sticking around for any more. Don't contact me again. Then I blocked both of them. A month later, I moved to another city. Nothing drastic, just far enough to feel like a fresh start. I kept my new address private and didn't tell anyone who might give it to Mark or Betty. Since then, for the first time in months, I've had peace. No more random phone calls, no more vandalism, no more drama. It's sad, really. Mark is my brother, and I'll always wish things had turned out differently. But in the end, I learned the hard way that you can't set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm, especially when they're the ones holding the match.